Liftoff will start in T-minus 10 seconds.
Hey everybody, this is Evan and John, and you're joining us on the Boomer NX Show. All right, joining us for our 2016 college football preview is our guest football analyst, John Springer Jr. John, how you doing this afternoon?
Good. How are y'all?
We're great. Thanks for joining us. We've been looking forward to this.
Been looking forward to it. Thank you for having me.
We're in mid-August now, and so we thought we would do a little college football preview for our listeners. And I wanted to start out with LSU. They're loaded with talent, and that's always the case. Certainly that's going to start with Leonard Fournette. They've got a new defensive coordinator and also a receivers coach, a new receivers coach that has a bit of an interesting story. Let me get your thoughts first on the coaches, and then we'll talk about Fournette a little bit.
Okay, they are loaded with talent as usual, but what is not usual is seniors returning and starters returning. LSU has 18 or 19 returning starters coming back, which they haven't had since 2011, 2012. LSU's biggest issue besides quarterback play has been guys leaving early, and they have guys coming back this year. So along with talent now, they have leadership and experience. So that's a difference. That's a big difference in LSU this year from years in the past.
So you feel like that the early exodus of players to the NFL, and some, unfortunately, even didn't get drafted, but you feel like the talent leaving early has really been a big issue with LSU over the past few years?
Oh, for sure. It's been a huge deal. You got to have seniors. You got to have returning starters, especially O-line and D-line. The recruiting on those two lines has not been great for the past couple of years, for the past few years. Or until the past few years, I should say. Then when you couple that with guys starting for a year, then leaving, it's been a little bit of a misconception about LSU that they were so talented all the time. I mean, they were talented, but there was not the mixture of talent and experience that you needed to beat teams like Alabama.
Right. Well, let's hit these new coaches real quick, and then we'll get into some of the impact players that you're expecting to see a lot out of this year. First, let's start with the new defensive coordinator.
All right. David Aranda comes from Wisconsin. Everywhere he's been, he's put up top 10, top 15 defenses. Over the past 3 years at Wisconsin combined, I think he's had the number one defense in college, even better than Alabama. Last year at Wisconsin, I think he had the number 2 ranked third down defense, which is something that's been a big issue for LSU for years. Even when Chavis was there, getting off the field on third downs and finishing games off was a big issue.
And I want to jump in real quick and concur with what you're talking about. Third downs seem to be a problem. It seemed to be a huge problem in the last 2 minutes of the first half and the last 2 minutes of the game.
Yes. Chavis, even though we had LSU had the DB talent, he seemed terrified to blitz, put pressure, but LSU is known as DBU. Well, what's the point of having all those great DBs if you're not willing to let them play man?
So
now, Aranda will do that. He's spoken about it. He's always said, "I want to play man. I want to play man. I want to play man," and then that allows his front seven to do a multitude of different things. So that is going to be a big difference for the defense this year.
Now let's talk about our wide receiver coach. That's something of an interesting, and I would assume, unique story.
Yeah, Damian Craig comes from Auburn. He's also spent time at Florida State under Jimbo Fisher. He coached quarterbacks at Florida State under Jimbo Fisher. Actually recruited Jameis Winston away from Alabama.
Well, he played quarterback in college.
Played quarterback in college. And from what everything that's been said, he's been a great impact on not only the receivers, but the quarterback too. Kind of working hand in hand with the OC, working with the quarterbacks and receivers together, allowing them to kind of see both sides of the coin to play better together.
Give me some, other than Fournette, give me some players on offense that you think will be high impact. And if there are any incoming freshmen that you think will be, let us know about them as well.
Okay. I'm going to stay at running back. We'll go Darius Geis.
Geis had a big year last year.
Geis, I love Geis. In ways, Geis was better than Fournette as a true freshman. His running style and his kind of pinball field has allowed him to change over to the college game even quicker, and maybe even his personality is kind of carefree, whereas Fournette's kind of a put everything on my shoulders guy. Geis has been able to come in under Fournette and not have any kind of, without the fanfare, without the pressure, and just come in and play. He's going to be a big part of the offense, a 1-2 punch at running back for LSU that I think will be the best in the country this year.
Do you think LSU will use more two-back sets than we've seen them using?
I'd like to say yes. I would like to see both of them on the field at the same time, possibly having Fournette or Geis going out and having a linebacker having to cover them. Not sure if that'll happen, but I'd like to see it.
We recently, and I forget the guy's name, but within the past 2 to 3 weeks, a wide receiver left, saying he wanted to go to a more wide-open offense. How do you see that particular player? Do you think he was just having trouble getting on the field, or you think what he said was legitimate?
I think it's a mixture of both. The balls thrown to talent ratio for receiver at LSU is probably higher than anywhere else in the country. What I mean by that is how many passes are thrown to receivers per game versus how many 4- and 5-star recruits are at receiver for LSU.
Right, that's a lot of talent not getting a lot of chances.
Exactly. Yeah. You even look at Zach Mettenberger's senior year, and only Jarvis and Odell really got catches. The third and fourth guy had, 7 and 6 catches together. So LSU has not been known for getting the ball to a third and fourth receiver. And not only that, but the freshman class of receivers at LSU is very, very good, very talented. And I'm sure that those guys were nipping at his heels, maybe even past him. And maybe it was a little bit of mixture of his attitude as well, as far as maybe he was told the offense was going to be more open. He wasn't seeing it, therefore it was affecting his attitude and work ethic on the field.
And do you know where he went?
I don't think it's been said yet, but I'm pretty sure that he was looking to go to Texas Tech, which they throw it.
They throw it about 70 times a game.
For a long time during his recruitment, Texas Tech was his leader. If he would have been from East Texas, he would have ended up going to Texas Tech. He was from Louisiana, ended up going to LSU, but his heart probably all along was at Texas Tech.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump over to Fournette real quick and focus on him. I've got some stats here in front of me. In 2014, he carried the ball 187 times for 1,034 yards for a 5.5 yard per carry average and 10 TDs. True freshman. As a sophomore, 300 carries for 1,953 yards, 6.5 yards per carry, and 22 TDs. When you throw in return yards, which is only from his freshman year, and I'm glad they got out of that business last year, and I hope to never see that again, and his occasional catches, through 2 seasons, he has total yards of all-purpose yards of 3,992 and 34 touchdowns. How do you see this year playing out statistic-wise for Leonard Fournette? Assuming, obviously, he stays healthy.
I don't think he'll get that number of carries this year. I think that the developing of guys, as well as Fournette going into his junior year and just how important he is, I think early in the season, maybe week 1 versus Wisconsin, he could get 20 to 25 touches, but say the second game against Jacksonville State, he should only get 5 to 7 touches and let guys take over, get reps, get comfortable, just in case something may happen to Fournette later in the season. And secondly, to keep him fresh for the rest of the season. So I don't think that he'll get the number of carries that I hope he doesn't. I hope he doesn't get the number of carries that he got last year. but I think his yards per carry will go up. I think his yards per touch will go up. I hope that he doesn't have to have the number of touches that he had last year.
We've got a listener question submission from a Juan Broussard, and his question is: will LSU make it to the 14 playoff with a one-dimensional offense? I'll amend that just a little bit and saying if they have a one-dimensional offense, they won't. So I'm going to ask you, do you think they will finally do what they need to do to make this offense less predictable and more productive against the hard teams, against the teams that play good defense? Do it enough to make the 4-team playoff.
Okay, first off, you're right. With a one-dimensional offense, they will not make the 14th playoff. They will not. I think that they will open up the offense enough. I think that Harris, going into his junior year, will understand the offense. A lot of people don't know that he had a hernia that he suffered in the Alabama game. And it was pretty evident that he was not the same quarterback after the hit that he took that caused the hernia in the Alabama game. You look at the Florida game, and you could see a good progression for a young quarterback. And going into halftime of the Alabama game, LSU ended the half with a big throw and catch or touchdown. But on that play, Harris was hit and suffered the sports hernia. So I think it affected him a lot for the rest of the season. I think that they will open it up, and if I had to bet, I would say that they would make it to the 14th playoff this year.
You know, I remember watching that LSU-Alabama game, and I think I developed a hernia during that as well.
It wasn't pretty.
No, it wasn't. All right, I took a look at the polls, and it's a lot of creativity here. Bama and Clemson are 1 and 2, and those were the two teams that played for the championship last year. The coaches poll is the one I'm looking at. Oklahoma number 3, FSU number 4, Ohio State number 5, LSU number 6, Stanford 7, Michigan 8, Notre Dame 9. One that jumps out to me, Tennessee. Now, they did come on late. They had a huge win in the Outback Bowl against Northwestern. I think they won that game by 39 or 40 points. Do you think a top 10 ranking for Tennessee is realistic?
I see the reason for it. Tennessee is returning more experience. Tennessee is the only team in the country, or in the Power 5, that is returning more experience than LSU. They're pretty much bringing back everybody. So it's understandable to think that they could go ahead and make that final jump. They have a senior quarterback who's gotten better every year. They have 2 good running backs. But here's the thing. Until that Tennessee team beats a good team, that Tennessee team is not going to really believe that they can beat a good team. They're going to have to play Alabama. Until they can beat Alabama, they're not going to believe that they can do it. So it's possible that they go ahead and do it and live up to that, and it's possible that they don't because of just of a mental block that the players don't really believe deep down that they can beat a team like Alabama because none of them have.
Didn't they give Bama a good game last year and then faltered down the stretch?
They did. They gave them a good game. I think it was a 5-point game.
And by the way, losing at the end is just as much psychological as it is anything else.
Right, and that goes back to what I was talking about. Until they beat a really good team and start to believe, then it's going to be really hard to bet on them against a team like Bama or against Florida, Georgia. Teams like that.
Right. The next 10 teams: Michigan State, Mississippi, Houston, TCU, Iowa, Georgia. Georgia's interesting. Kirby Smart, new head coach. First time they've been without Mark Richt in quite a while. And I will say I was surprised to see his firing last year. Southern Cal, especially since there was so much, when that happened, there was so much chatter about Les Miles. And it was almost like a magician getting you to look at one hand and then doing something with the other one. I mean, I know that one had nothing to do with the other, but we're all looking to see if Les Miles keeps his job. And all of a sudden, Mark Richt is walking the plank. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Washington, Oklahoma State, North Carolina. That's the second 10. Anybody there you feel like should be a little higher or maybe shouldn't be as high as they are?
I'll talk about Georgia for a second. I was not surprised about Mark Richt. I was actually talking to a friend during the Alabama game, and I was watching the game, and at one point it's a 3-point game or something like that. And Bama broke a big run, ran it right down the middle of the defense, and then they had a defensive turnover. Long story short, it went from a 3-point game or a tie to a 21-point game within 3 or 4 minutes. And I was talking to my friend, and I said, they just remembered who Big Brother was.
Mm-hmm.
And that Georgia team, and Georgia team's under Mark Richt, when Saban was at LSU, and since Saban's been at Bama, Saban's teams were mentally and physically much, much tougher and stronger than the Georgia teams under Mark Richt. And I said to my friend, a lot of people are on the hot seat this year, but nobody's gotten less with more than Mark Richt has. And I don't know what they're waiting on, because if he was going to do what they wanted him to do, he would have done it by now. So
he was always good for a 9-3, maybe a 10-2.
Right. But here's the thing: had number 1 picks at quarterback, had top 5 picks at running back, had top 5 picks at receiver. His defenses were never tough. His teams were never tough. They were never mentally tough. They were never physically tough. They would always give up in big games. They would always quit. So I think it was deserved. I think that when you have it's the same situation at LSU with Les Miles. When you have the talent that they have, then yes, more is expected of you. And so I think it was deserved, and I think that having a guy come over and coach them that was with Saban for so long is going to make a big difference. And I think it's going to help.
So you think Georgia is more legitimate, at least in the long term, with Kirby Smart?
I do. I think that he'll give them exactly what they needed: mental toughness, good defense, and I think in the long term it's going to be an upgrade. They brought in Jacob Eason, who was the number 1 quarterback this year, and I saw him in the spring game, and good Lord, I thought, man, if we could have a senior play like this at LSU, it'd be fantastic. And he was a freshman early enrollee, and of course he'll have some growing pains this year with him. But with that quarterback, and then what Kirby Smart will do with the defense, I think that Georgia's. I'd be excited if I was a Georgia fan.
So in the SEC East this year, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, or somebody else taking it?
I have to go Tennessee.
Okay.
I have to go Tennessee.
SEC West, it seems like it always comes down to Bama, LSU, although last year LSU, with their November swoon, they weren't even in the conversation late in the year. Do you think it comes down to Bama, LSU this year for the SEC West, or do you see somebody else, and I'm just going to say it like this, pushing Bama because we know they're going to be in the mix?
Bama has some tough road games. They play Ole Miss on the road. Ole Miss has beat them twice. Bama's only weak point under Saban has been pass defense, has been against really good quarterbacks, and Ole Miss has a great one. And they've already and Ole Miss has beat them twice in a row.
And they beat them twice in a row, yeah.
Right. So and Ole Miss has a really good receiving core, great quarterback. So Bama's going to have to get by Ole Miss first, but LSU's going to have to handle business too. I think that the team that goes into the game between Bama and Ole Miss more confident will win that game, and that will determine the team that comes out of the West.
Isn't it? Don't they play at Ole Miss this year?
Yeah, they do. They do play at Ole Miss.
Okay,
yeah.
You mentioned that as a tough road game for them. Wrapping up the SEC West, Texas A&M. Sumlin is on the hot seat. If he's not, he should be, because for what he's being paid, that rich contract bump up and extension he got about 3 seasons ago, he hasn't accomplished anything. In fact, he may have accomplished saving Les Miles' job last year. What do you see for Texas A&M this year? They've had quarterback defections, 2 fairly recently. It seems like maybe 1 over a year ago. They're not performing well. Their defense hasn't played well, and I understand that John Chavis is there now, and he's got a history of success in the SEC. But They didn't do well last year. They haven't done well. Let me put it this way: was Sumlin's success built entirely around Johnny Manziel?
Two things. First off, Sumlin's feet should not be hot. It should be magma. It should be molten lava. Secondly, Sumlin owes at least half of the money he's made to Johnny Manziel, because without him, there's no way he gets that new contract. And without him, I mean, it's not even brought up.
Yeah.
The defense has been awful throughout.
Right.
He continues to have deal after deal after deal with his assistant coaches, too. I don't know if you know this, but they had a coaches camp where either women, it was specifically geared towards women, or women were there, and there were some jokes that were made by the coaches of A&M that were putting on the camp that were in really, really, really poor taste and just ridiculous. But it just goes along with what has been Sumlin the whole time.
He runs a loose ship.
That's an understatement. It's taking on water. It's taking on water everywhere. The thing with Miles may not be the best game day coach. Miles is not the best game day coach, but he's a man of principle. He's a man of morals, and everybody on the team is going the right direction under the same flag. You don't get that same sense from Texas A&M.
Yeah, I agree. Every time, and look, I've been a critic on this show of Les Miles, and I may very well continue to be. But with regards to football coaching, game day coaching, and getting out of the 70s, I think the 70s was great for music, but pretty crappy for football strategy. But Miles is at his absolute best when there is some sort of tragedy, and you see him discussing how it affects. So we had shootings in Baton Rouge a few weeks ago. We had police officers being shot, and now we've got a flood. And he is at his best when everything seems to be swirling around him, and you like him then. You know you're going to be infuriated with him on Saturday, but you like him when you see him in those settings.
Right. The bottom line is he's a good man with good morals and good principles, and that filters down to guys he hires, and then the attitude of those guys, and then down to the players. And I think it pretty much the opposite is true of Sumlin, and I think that filters down into the guys he hires and the attitude of those guys. And then the attitude of the players, the work ethic, ability of the team to pull together in a bad time versus fall apart.
Yeah, it all certainly does start at the top and work its way down. John, we're going to take a break right now, and when we come back, we're going to hit some of the other conferences. And if you would just lay out some highlights, what you expect from the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and maybe the Big 12 and the ACC. But anyway, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back and hit that.
Okay.
Okay, we are back with football analyst John Springer Jr. John, we've hit the SEC and LSU pretty thoroughly. Let's move up to the Big Ten and the developing rivalry between Jim Harbaugh, the coach of Michigan, and Urban Meyer, the coach of Ohio State. Certainly Michigan-Ohio State rivalry goes back forever, but now you have two coaches that seem like they will do a good job of getting on each other's nerves. What do you see in the Big Ten in general, and for Michigan, Ohio State, Harbaugh, and Urban Meyer in particular?
I will say this as a college football fan. Until Harbaugh was hired at Michigan, I had zero interest in Big Ten football. None. I knew who was going to win the conference every year, Ohio State, as soon as Meyer got his guys in. I think it's great now because you have, regardless of the rest of the conference, you have that Michigan-Ohio State rivalry. They are both recruiting at elite levels. Harbaugh is a fantastic developer of talent. He's a fantastic planner. His offense is amazing. I was watching his offense late last year. It was his first year there, and the variation in his offense was amazing and just fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
The things he did, different formations, different plays, different personnel settings, just keeping defenses off balance, and he didn't have any of his guys there. He was doing that with talent that was just left to him, obviously by a coach that wasn't doing his job.
Right.
When Harbaugh gets his guys in there, I think that Michigan is going to, more than any other team, win the Big Ten. I actually picked them to win this year because of the losses on the Michigan State team and Ohio State team. Ohio State had a ton of draft picks leave. Ohio State faced something like the 2011 Exodus that LSU faced. Guys that came in under Meyer, and because the talent was depleted, they got to get in and play right away. And they've gotten in, gotten their experience, and they're gone. And they had so many guys leave that I think that even though they are probably a more talented roster than Michigan overall, I think what Michigan has coming back, and then with Harbaugh's influence, will be enough to win the Big Ten this year. But it's a great thing to see. And like I said, before Harbaugh got there, I had zero interest in watching anything Big Ten related. But now, I guarantee you I'm going to watch at least the Michigan-Ohio State game every year.
Oh, I watched a lot of Michigan games last year just because Harbaugh was coaching. What do you think? A lot was said over the past several months about these satellite camps that he ran. What's your, for the uninformed, real quickly? What was that, or what were they, and how do you feel about them?
Satellite camps are where teams like, say, Michigan will go into a school site in Florida, whether it be a high school or a college, and run a camp and have all of their coaches there and everything. And what it does is just it gets the talent in the area and gets them one-on-one time with the coaches that they would never have gotten, say with prospects from Florida, with the coaching staff in Michigan, that they would have never gotten. So that's what it is. It's holding a camp just like LSU does. Every team does summer camps, but that stuff has usually been done on campus.
Right.
Now,
right.
Harbaugh kind of found a little bit of a loophole and is exploiting it. And like if you're not doing everything you can to win, then you're not doing enough. And he's going out there and he's getting one-on-one time with these recruits, and it's paying off in the recruiting, in Michigan's recruiting. So,
I believe Coach Saban was fairly vocal in his criticism of this. Am I right?
Oh, of course. Saban doesn't want any part of that. Here's the thing. It's beneficial only to teams in the Big Ten and teams where there's not a ton of talent.
Right. Right. Saban's not going to go up to Michigan and have a football camp. Right.
I think somebody even asked him, well, why don't you just do it back to them? And he said something along the lines of, it wouldn't be worth my time.
Right.
We don't have any reason to go up there.
Right.
So it's something that only benefits teams other than Alabama, teams other than LSU.
Harbaugh has a way of tweaking rival coaches. He did it with Pete Carroll on several levels. I remember when he then was in the NFL, he did it with I believe it was
Carroll.
after San Francisco beat Detroit, he gave the Detroit coach a real hard slap on the back that didn't set too well. Harbaugh definitely has a way of rubbing opposing coaches the wrong way.
Harbaugh is super, just the top level of competitive, along the lines, on the same lines of Nick Saban. Coaches like Saban, coaches like Carroll, they're not used to dealing with somebody that's just as crazy as they are. that will go as far as they will. Now here's the thing. Because Harbaugh is going against Urban Meyer every year, I love him. If he were to come to Mississippi State, I'd hate him.
Well, I'm going to concur. I love him going against Urban Meyer, and I loved him going against Pete Carroll. Whether it's Stanford versus USC or San Francisco versus Seattle, I enjoyed it. I will watch this year with interest. Elsewhere in the Big Ten, we've got Michigan State, and you mentioned them. They've been very consistent the past few years, well up into the top 10. But you mentioned they lost a lot. I think you said Michigan State lost a lot this past year.
They did.
Do you think they'll have a significant drop off?
I think they will. What you have at Michigan State is a situation where it's kind of like a program like Iowa, like Wisconsin, where they bring in guys that are not as highly rated, but maybe 90% of their team gets redshirted, and maybe guys don't start till their redshirt junior year, so that whereas other teams may have more talent, but these guys have more experience, have an extra year or two in the system, an extra year or two weight training. So kind of like a Wichita State in basketball, where you have a team in basketball that doesn't have the talent, but they have more experience. They have older players, so they are able to compete. And I think that's what has allowed them to compete kind of at a high level every year and be even more consistent than, say, a team like LSU, who obviously has more talent, but you wouldn't know it watching the consistency as far as how well the team plays week in, week out, year in, year out.
Right. What do you see for Penn State? They're still obviously trying to come back from the whole Sandusky thing. How do you see their prospects for this year?
I think that they're still a couple years away, and I'm not sure that the coach they have now is the right coach to get the job done. Is that still the guy that came from Vanderbilt? It is.
Okay.
It is. And the thing is, he's fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Because of the lack of talent. I don't see it turning around soon. This year, the Big Ten comes down to Michigan State, and Ohio State. But more so, Michigan and Ohio State.
And you think Michigan takes it?
I have to go with Michigan based on the returning talent,
right?
And how much Ohio State lost.
Anything out of Wisconsin this year? Of course, they opened the season with LSU. That's a big high marquee game early the first weekend of the season. What do you see for Wisconsin?
I think you see a consistent Wisconsin year with what you've seen in years past. I think you see a good team fundamentally. Losing Aranda is going to hurt. They also lost a couple of playmakers on the defense, along with losing Aranda. So I think the defense definitely takes a step back. There's no way that Wisconsin has a top 3 defense this year. It's number 2 in total defense. There's no way that happens this year. So the offense is going to have to be much better and has to produce much more in order for them to have the same amount of success. Not sure if they can do that or not.
And Nebraska in the Big Ten now. I guess this is their 3rd or 4th year in the Big Ten after moving over from the Big 12, maybe 4th or 5th by now. They've certainly not lived up to old-time Nebraska expectations, but in all honesty, it's been a while since they did that. Bo Pelini was pretty much a constant threat to completely explode on the sidelines or in the press conferences or anywhere else. He's gone. This is going to be, I believe, their 2nd year under a new coach coming up. What do you see for Nebraska? Anything Anything for Nebraska fans to get excited about?
First off, as a fan of comedy first, football second, I hated to see Bo Pelini go. Hated it. I loved it. I loved Pelini because, I tell you what, it was always interesting. Pelini on the sidelines when things were going wrong was just great TV as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm sure that Nebraska fans will not side with me on that, but I hate to see him go. I think that, here's the thing, recruiting is the lifeblood of any college football team. And the talent that whatever happened that allowed them to create what they created is not there anymore. Another thing that a lot of people don't know this, that a huge reason that Nebraska was able to do what they did when they did it was they were on the cutting edge of modern-day strength and conditioning in college football.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was doing that when Nebraska started doing that. They were the first team to implement the kind of bigger, faster, stronger program into all their players. And the coach, Tom Osborne, told their strength and conditioning coach, one of my guys drops time in the 40 and you're fired. Everybody at that time thought that getting bigger
mm-hmm.
would ultimately slow you down. And it would, because they did not know how to train.
Right.
That strength and conditioning coach and Tom Osborne, they brought, when you look at those games, when you look at those Nebraska games, at the end of the first quarter, 7-3.
Yeah.
7-7. At halftime, 10-3, 13-7. Into the third quarter, 56-7.
It was a wear 'em out thing, wasn't it?
It completely was.
Yeah.
Yeah. They had talent. Tom Osborne was able to, after winning some, he was then able to bring in better talent. But it was always a wear 'em down. It was always a wear 'em down situation, and that was because of the strength and conditioning program, and that they were ahead of the curve. A lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people just think that it was just Tom Osborne. But here's the thing: you're looking at Nebraska. How many players a year do you hear of great players from Nebraska and surrounding? You don't see it.
Yeah.
So what was going on that made that situation different? And that's what it was. It was the strength and conditioning program. But then the thing is now that everybody has that.
Right. Everybody's caught up with them.
Right.
And something also that helped, they only had 1 or 2 games a year. Oklahoma, Colorado at times. Other than that, they pretty much didn't play anybody. Speaking of Oklahoma, let's jump into the Big 12 real quick. I have a couple of schools that I'm particularly interested in, and one of them is Oklahoma. Oklahoma, for the past few years, up until last year, had underachieved. Then last year, they started out, I think, somewhere around 19 or 20 in the preseason polls and actually worked their way up and finished higher at the end of the year rather than lower. But we ended up seeing Big Game Bob yet again. What do you see for Oklahoma this year? And by Big Game Bob, I mean always managing to lay an egg somewhere.
Right. I like Oklahoma. A big game early. I'm not sure if it's the first weekend or not, but I'm pretty sure that Ohio State plays Oklahoma, if not the first weekend, early on. And that'll be a tough test for Ohio State. Baker Mayfield at quarterback for Oklahoma is amazing. Love him. He's almost Johnny Manziel.
He was the walk-on that transferred from Texas Tech, wasn't he?
Right, and ended up beating out. What was the quarterback that transferred to Texas A&M? Trevor Knight. Okay. Baker Mayfield beat out Trevor Knight at Oklahoma to play quarterback. Trevor Knight, the same Trevor Knight, who demolished Alabama's defense in the Sugar Bowl not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that shows his level of talent. And like I said, he's for sure to me the closest thing right now to a Johnny Manziel, but I like him much more. I think he's much more of a team guy, but he's just as good of a playmaker. And they go as he goes. He's going to have to play well. He's going to have to make plays. But I like Oklahoma in the Big 12 this year.
Now
sure.
he's small. Has he had any injury history so far?
As far as I know, he hasn't. I didn't know him until late in the year. so I don't know everything about him. But as far as I know, that's another reason I said very, very Johnny Manziel-ish.
Right.
Doesn't have the height, doesn't have the size, none of the prototype things that you look for, but just a crazy ability to make plays and to keep fighting and to lead teammates and to allow teammates to believe we can win this game.
Yeah,
that's a bigger thing than people realize.
There's a coach in the Big 12 that I pull for, but I don't pull for the program. And I think he inherited a mess. And I believe he's going into his third or fourth year. I'm pulling for him because I just think he had such a tough job to come in and clean up what had been allowed to fall into disarray. And that's at the University of Texas, and that's Charlie Strong. They hired him away from Louisville. Charlie was close to getting the boot last year, and they ended up, and I forget who it was, but he ended up with one or two very surprise big wins that caught everybody off guard. And was one of them against Oklahoma State or Baylor?
Oklahoma, I think they beat Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, okay. Well, there's the big game bomb right there.
Right.
Charlie Strong. Does he turn it around? Does he get it headed in the right direction? Is this his last year or none of the above?
It is definitely not his last year. He is definitely not on the way out. He has that program on the way up in a big, big way. Charlie Strong has done a fantastic job.
You know what? He's done it the right way. From what I can tell, he cleaned house. He didn't go after quick wins. He went after rebuilding the program, is what it seems like was his goal.
He went in and kicked half the starters off the team, it seemed like, because they had an attitude of entitlement that a lot of people had pointed at.
And I'm going to chalk that up directly to Mack Brown. No one in the history of college football did less with more than Mack Brown. No one ever.
Right. Mack Brown reminds me a lot of the Georgia coach that went to Florida. Or, excuse me,
Rick.
The Georgia coach that went to Miami.
Went to Miami. Yeah.
Mack Brown reminds me a ton of Rick. In that all of the talent, but not the hardware. He did get the one national championship, but without that quarterback,
Vince Young, yeah, I mean he rode Vince Young to that national championship.
Right, that was
he certainly did.
When you watch that team play the national championship game against USC, one of the best, if not the best, performances I've ever seen by a quarterback without throwing it that much.
Oh yeah,
he threw it just enough to keep the defense off balance, but just an amazing athlete. And there was not a lot of planning in it. It was kind of a one read. If your first guy's not open, you're going to pull it down and run, and you're just going to out athlete everybody, and that's what he did. And that's not to the credit of the coach. In fact, there was a lot of stories earlier that year how the head coach is trying to get him to do this and do that and do this right and do that right, and it wasn't working. And Vince Young kind of told him, "Why don't you just let me do what I want to do?
Yeah.
Why don't you just let me be me?" Well, it worked in that situation.
Right. Yeah, that's not going to work in the NFL, but it worked there.
Right, because he was such a great athlete.
Out to the Pac. Oh, go ahead.
I want to go back to Charlie Strong for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Strong had a great class last year, class of freshmen. In this past class, he had a really, really good class again, along with bringing in a quarterback. And what happened at Baylor ended up netting him 4 or 5 more 4- to 5-star recruits from guys that had committed to Baylor.
And left when everything went to hell there in the past few months.
And went to Texas. So not only did they have a great class, but then they got 4 or 5 more great players from Baylor's class. So it's just a matter of time before Charlie Strong has Texas back on top.
Well, again, I don't pull for the program, but I am pulling for Charlie Strong. I just like the way the guy handles his business. Jumping out to the Pac-12 real quick. Big things are expected of Washington. Chris Peterson, this is like his maybe 3rd year there after his long stint at Boise State. What do you see in the Pac-12 in general? Oregon was down a little bit last year after several years of top 10 finishes. What do you see in the Pac-12 with regards to Washington, Oregon, Stanford, USC, UCLA, and the Arizona teams?
Oregon lost coaches. For a while, they were losing a coach, seemed like every year or two. But they were able to replace him with the right guy from within the system. They seem to have run out of luck in that. They don't seem to have the right coach now, or, they're on their third or fourth guy, and he's not been able to do what the previous coaches were able to do.
Right.
The quarterback position and the offense has not worked the same. Plus, they have not gotten the talent on defense that they've had. People don't realize the amount of talent on those Oregon defenses from when they were top 5 teams. So Oregon's on the way down right now in the Pac-12, and I don't see it coming back up this year.
And how do you see Washington, Chris Peterson in Washington?
I think Washington will compete for that.
For the big Pac-12 North?
Yeah, I think they will compete for that Pac-12 North. USC has a ton of talent, but, let's be honest, nobody knows for sure what to expect from that team.
They do seem to be quite dysfunctional.
Still leftovers from Kiffin being a head coach there.
Yeah.
And then Sarkisian after.
Right.
So they're in flux. Just recently they got back their full allotment of scholarships. I think UCLA is the team to beat because they have the best quarterback in the Pac-12.
In the Pac-12 South, you think UCLA's the team to beat?
Right. I like UCLA in the Pac-12 South because of the quarterback. And Jim Mora quietly has done a really good job of bringing in talent to UCLA.
Yes, he has.
And USC has been down.
Right.
So
yes, he has. ACC real quick. Anybody other than Florida State and Clemson in the hunt for the ACC title?
No.
Okay.
Big no. Florida State and Clemson, talent-wise, I think are so far in front of everyone else. Clemson has Deshaun Watson, who may be the best player in college football this year, is definitely the best playmaker at quarterback as far as making tough throws, making nice throws, pulling it down and running, being smart, being athletic, extending drives. Deshaun Watson's got it all. And then you have Florida State, who has recruited as well as anybody the past 4 or 5 years. So it's just a matter of, do they have a quarterback? Are they able to put it together as far as Florida State goes? I like Clemson.
Yeah, and that quarterback is something else. And, of course, Dabo Swinney is the all-quote coach every weekend.
Right. Yeah, he's done a great job bringing in talent to a school that I didn't ever think that they would get to that level. They were a player or two away from winning that game last year.
They were.
Against Bama.
They were.
I mean, they were a player or two away. And here's the thing. Their star defensive end and their star corner both were out mid-first quarter or late first quarter.
Yep.
They played that game down a couple men. And the difference between Bama down a guy or two and Clemson down a guy or two is huge. Alabama having top 3 classes 5, 6, 7 years. One guy going out, 2 guys going out, they can recover. Clemson, when that same thing happens, they just couldn't make the plays on defense. They couldn't get the stops when they needed to. The difference between Clemson and Florida State, Clemson and Bama, Clemson and LSU is depth. But their starting guys are as talented as anybody, and they have the best quarterback in the country.
Opening weekend, Bama versus Southern Cal. Bama
rolls.
These are just some great opening weekend matchups. I like what college football has started doing over the past few years. These high-profile marquee matchups in the opening weekend instead of every power taking on the little sisters of the poor.
It's so much better. I was talking to my son a week or two ago about this. So much better than it was when I was his age, where the first month of the season, you really only watched for a quarter or a half to see how bad your team was going to beat the Louisiana South Community College for Girls team.
Right.
You would watch for 10 to 15 minutes, 30 minutes, just to see what they look like, and then you turn it off. What college football has done in the past 5 years, 6 years, has been great. It's great for the sport. I think it's great for the teams that participate in these games because all off season, they're thinking about that first game, and they're working toward that versus working toward playing an FCS team where there's not a lot of motivation. There's not a lot of urgency. I think the teams that schedule these games, I think it helps them in the long run.
I think it helps them too. And I remember going back to 2011 when LSU opened the season against Oregon. Oregon, who had played in the national championship game the year before against Auburn. That they rode that big win, that momentum through the 2011 season in LSU. I remember it vividly, and I agree with you that these matchups are great for the game. They're great for the sport. And here's something else, too. The college and NFL used to start at the same weekend. Now the NFL isn't starting until the next weekend, or specifically the next Thursday night. So it's Labor Day weekend is all college. They have it all to themselves. And these matchups are great. They really are. I love the way the season starts, and I love with the playoff the way the season ends. In my mind, college football is the best it's ever been.
It definitely is. There is must-watch TV. I want to see how Ole Miss does against Florida State. I want to see how Bama does against USC. Here's another thing.
Well, Oklahoma and Houston also is that first weekend.
Oklahoma and Houston, and not only are they good matchups, but things are serious already.
Sure.
There's already a sense of urgency. There's already a thing of we need to win this game.
Yeah.
Which ratchets up the level of competition between the teams. It ratchets up the effort given between the teams, and it just immediately creates we have to win this game.
Yep.
Because you can't if you want to be in the Final Four, you can't lose your first game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, you could. I mean, it's better to lose in September, early September, than it is in November. But you don't want to. You don't want to
right.
Because what that does is it takes away. That's your mulligan right there.
Right.
You don't have another one.
Right. Technically, you can. Mathematically, you can. But the thing is, okay, we've already lost. Now the whole rest of the season pressure is
right.
Right.
You can lose that one, but then you have to run the table.
Right.
You have to run the table when you haven't even started your conference season yet. So, yes, it definitely creates a sense of urgency. John, I want to finish with LSU playing Wisconsin at historic Lambeau Field. As an LSU fan, I would love to be able to make this trip and see this game in what I consider to be the most historic football stadium in this country. I think it's an honor for LSU to play at Lambeau Field. How do you see give me a score in that game?
I'm gonna go LSU 27, Wisconsin 13.
There you are, listeners. Place your bets accordingly. LSU by 14. I haven't seen the spread, but I assume that would cover it.
I think it's around 10.
Okay.
I think it's around 10. I think that as the game goes on, that the LSU offense will wear on the Wisconsin defense without a couple of their playmakers from last year, without their defensive coordinator. I think that it will be close. I think it could easily be close into early fourth quarter. But I think LSU at some point pulls away and wins by 13-14.
Well, I hope you're right as an LSU fan. I hope you are correct. John, I want to thank you again for joining us, and we are going to attempt to get scheduled with you an NFL/fantasy football preview over the next week or two. Something, but certainly between now and the beginning of the NFL season.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Sounds good. I like it.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for joining us.
Thank y'all for having me.
And we will talk to you later.
All right. Thank you, guys.
All right, again, everybody, that was John Springer Jr. with some NCAA football analysis and preview. We hope you enjoyed that. We intend to come back with something more topical and news-oriented next time, and then we hope to get an NFL and fantasy preview after that, certainly before the NFL season starts. So that's what we're lining up for the remainder of the month of August here on the Boomer and X Show. If you'd like to, you can look at our website, theboomerandxshow.com. You can reach us at the BoomerNX at yahoo.com on email, and at BoomerNX Show is our Twitter handle. Thanks for listening, and we will see you guys next time.